My name is Emmett Ervin Howe, and I was born August the 5th, 1925, at 607 St. James Street, San Antonio, Texas. So I'm now 64 years old, and it's April of 1990. What I'd like to do in this tape is relate some of the experiences that I had during World War II when I joined the Navy on March the 6th of 1943. To give a little background in my life before the war started, I went to Fannin Elementary School on East Houston Street in San Antonio, then to Ralph Waldo Emerson Junior High School on Pine Street in San Antonio, and then to Brackenridge High School in San Antonio also. Now, when the war started on December 7th of 1941, I was still in high school and I was 16 years old. So I was unable to immediately join the war effort and enter the Navy as I did later. So it was necessary for me to wait until 1943 when I was to graduate from high school before I was 17 years old and able to join the Navy. I joined the Navy on March the 6th of 1943, and I wanted to go in the Navy because all of my young teenage life I'd been interested in the Navy. In fact, I had always kind of had a dream of going to the Naval Academy at Annapolis and becoming a naval officer, but I was unable to pursue that dream. And so with the war coming along, I decided to join the Navy instead of waiting to be drafted into the Army. In fact, I had tried, before that I actually enlisted in the Navy, to get in the Naval Air Force, and I went to Dallas and took the physical exam, but it was unable to pass because my right eye was not 20/20. It was a little too weak for them to accept me into the Naval Air Corps. So in January I had already completed the necessary requirements to graduate from high school, but since I was a midterm graduate, I was taking a couple of courses until May when I would graduate officially. But they allowed us, those of us that wanted to go on into the service, to go ahead and get credit for those courses and to graduate normally, even though we were in the service. So in March, I went ahead and had to get Mom and Daddy to sign my papers because I was not old enough to make that decision on my own, which they did, even though Robbie was already in the Navy and in the thick of it in the Pacific Ocean on the light cruiser USS Helena. I had to go to Fort Sam Houston to take my physical exam, and that was kind of a new experience for me because they took about 150 of us and stripped us down naked and ran us through all these different rooms in lines with a magic marker type number on our chest that identified us as a person, and we went through all the different exams, heart and looking at our teeth and exams for hernia and all that sort of thing, completely naked. And it seemed strange with 150 naked men running around through that building getting their physicals to go into the service. But I passed the physical okay, so was scheduled to leave around the 13th of March on the train to go to San Diego, California to attend the naval training camp there, or what they call boot camp. So the time came and I left on the train, and we went to Del Rio, and Daddy was working between San Antonio and Del Rio at the time, and he actually was in Del Rio. So when we got to Del Rio, it was kind of late, but he came on the train and managed to locate me some way. And so we were able to say goodbye there in Del Rio. And then after a short stop in Del Rio, we moved on the train through El Paso and on through Arizona to boot camp in California. I remember that I was kind of sad and lonesome on the train, and a fella probably noticed that because this was the first time that I'd really left home for any length of time and going off to war and all that. It kind of was a big experience for me, and a fella came over and introduced himself and made friends and tried to keep me from being quite so down in the dumps and so lonesome. But I was able to get on out to San Diego, where they met the train with a big bus and carried us all over to the Naval Training Station and got us started on our boot camp training. And after that, of course, they kept us so busy that we were unable to be lonesome. Some of the things that I remember there was the first night, I think, that we were in a big barracks, and I left my breeches on a bench that was in the middle of the barracks, and I had $2 in my wallet, and during that night somebody opened my wallet and took the $2 out, and so I started out getting an experience or a lesson in being careful with my personal things, and especially money, to keep somebody from taking it. I just didn't imagine that a fellow sailor would steal my money. Fortunately, I had $10 rat hold in the wallet, which they didn't get, so I was able to have some money. What they did when we got there was to have us issue us all the Navy uniform equipment, and we packaged up our civilian clothes and sent them all home. And from then on through the war, we were always required to wear the official Navy uniform, so we had no need for any civilian clothes. The other thing I remember is that when we went through the mess hall, they had these steel trays with compartments, and you just went along there, and they just took big spoons and flopped the food onto the tray, and you were required to eat everything that they gave you on the tray. And they gave me so much food, I wasn't used to eating that much, and I was small anyway, only 120 pounds, and I had a real difficult time eating all the food, but I did because I was afraid not to. But then eventually I learned that if you didn't want to eat, you had to go through the line anyway. You just turn your tray upside down, and then you could go through the line and miss a meal that way, which I did, and I was real grateful to be able to miss a meal and not be so miserably full, and was able to survive the food requirement and still get by. They had all kinds of strange foods, rutabaga and things like that I wasn't familiar with and didn't like, but I was required to eat whatever they put on the tray, so I did that for sure. During the boot camp, we had a good CO who was not mean or anything, and he taught us a lot of things about marching and all that sort of stuff. And while I was in boot camp for only 5 weeks, and we did all kinds of early morning calisthenics and marching, and we fired rifles and learned about air raids, and one day I was in a trench, and they were simulating an air raid, and they came and got me and told me that I was being transferred out of boot camp to Indiana, where I would go to school. And so I didn't complete the actual boot camp requirements, and I had to pack up my things, and they sent me on a train to Michigan City, Indiana, where I would attend a 1-month school learning about electricity, and then to go on to a radio, radar, and sonar equipment maintenance school. I'd done fairly well on my written tests, and so they had selected me to attend this particular school, which actually would last about 10 months altogether, at the end of which I would be a radar type electronic technician, and would have good training, and would be able to advance into the petty officer rank. So I took the train on up to Michigan City and went through that 1 month school, which was fairly easy because I had learned most of that sort of thing in physics in high school, and was able to get through that okay. At one time we were only about 50 miles from Chicago, and we went over to Chicago on a weekend, I think, and we visited the big city, and we went into an area, well, we spent the night, and I say we because I went with some buddies. I don't remember their name, but we went over there, and the next day we were asking directions to get back to Michigan City, and we told the person where we'd spent the night, and they were really amazed because they said that just nobody went into that Clark Street area where we were because of the danger, and it was such a bad neighborhood. The chances of getting knocked in the head or robbed or killed or something like that was too great. But we didn't know that, and people in Chicago during the war treated servicemen very well, and we didn't feel like we were in any danger. But after I completed the school at Michigan City, Indiana, I was able to get into the most prestigious advanced school in Washington, D.C., because I'd done well in that school, and they gave me 8 days to get to Washington, D.C. to start the 3 months intermediate school, followed by the 6 months advanced school. But it would all be in the same place, the radio material school, which was at the Naval Research Center in Washington, D.C. So this came quite suddenly, this word that I was to have 8 days, and I wanted to go back home on the way to Washington, D.C. So I didn't have but about $2, and so I wired home to get Daddy to send $20 to the Western Union in Chicago, and I would take the train on over to Chicago and pick it up at the Western Union station, and I would be able to buy my train ticket on down to San Antonio. So when I got over to Chicago, I went to the Western Union station, and lo and behold, it was closed. So I was really in a dilemma. I didn't really know what to do. So I went to the USO Naval, or the Service Center, which was a big building in Chicago that was just devoted to dealing with servicemen, their problems and needs and things like that. And I went to the information desk and told them what my problem was, and they told me, or they checked and found out that when that particular Western Union station was closed, that everything was routed through another office at the Sherman Hotel, and they gave me directions to get over there. Well, I went over to the Sherman Hotel and told them what I expected, and about 10 or 15 minutes later, sure enough, the money came through, and I was able to get my $20 that Daddy had wired to me, and I jumped on a trolley and went to Dearborn Station in Chicago to catch the train. Well, because of all the confusion, I got there after the train had left for St. Louis, and I was really depressed, but I went to the ticket office and got my ticket and told them that I just missed the train. They said, well, that was no problem. There'd be another train leaving in about 2 hours. So I stayed there at the station and caught the next train, went on down through St. Louis, where I had to change trains to a different train going down to San Antonio. But I managed all that okay, and of course had to carry all of my possessions, all of my equipment, uniform, and everything in my sea bag, and finally got down to San Antonio, and I think somebody met me at the train, and I was able to spend about 5 or 6 days in San Antonio at home, visiting and everything, and then I took the train on out to Washington, D.C. When I got to the train station, Grandpa and I guess the rest of the family, Grandpa Fuller, had taken me down there, and Daddy had gotten me a Pullman car, so I would have a place to sleep to get to go on over to Washington, D.C. So Grandpa Fuller, he got on the Pullman car. Being a Pullman conductor, he got together with the porter and gave him a couple of dollars and told him to watch out for me and give me special attention, which he didn't do. So I rode the Pullman car to New Orleans and then on to Washington, D.C. And we got into Washington, D.C. during the night, and they just unhooked the Pullman car, and we slept till in the morning, and then we were able to get up and go ahead and go to our station after daylight, so that made it nice. Then I reported into the radio materials school at Washington, D.C., and I was there in Washington for 9 months going to school, learning all about taking care of radar and radio equipment. So that was quite an experience, and I had weekends off, and I was there were 6 of us stayed in a room, and it was a pretty good school. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of work and everything, and we had both study work and practical hands-on work where we actually repaired equipment and things like that. While I was there, Robbie came back from the Pacific after his ship had been sunk, and he was assigned to another ship at Norfolk, Virginia. So he came up one time. He got a pass, and he was able to come up on the train, and we kind of visited around Washington, D.C., and I believe it was around Thanksgiving in 1943, and he was able to come out and have either Thanksgiving dinner at our base or Christmas. I'm not sure which it was. Another thing that I was able to do while I was there in Washington, D.C. is go up to New York City and visit with Calvin Williams, who was a good friend that I'd grown up with and gone to school with here in San Antonio, and he was up there visiting with his father. So I was able to go up to New York City, and he showed me around New York, and we visited different places and everything for a couple of days, and then I had to go back to my schooling. Well, at the end, about the end of February or somewhere in January of 1944, I finished my schooling, and they asked us at that time to make selections on what kind of duty we wanted. Well, the ones that were the better students were able to get better choices. So the one thing that I'd wanted was to get on a warship, so I requested duty on a destroyer or a tin can. Now, I'd studied about warships and things, and this was really the kind of a ship that I wanted to get on because they were small enough to maneuver, and they were fighting ships and that sort of thing. And so there were 2 of us, actually 4 of us, selected to go on duty on a destroyer, and two to each destroyer. So actually the destroyer that I was going to was not yet completely built. So I had a few days to get to Kearney, New Jersey, where the ship was being built at the shipyards there. And so I didn't have enough time to go back to San Antonio, so I went to Kentucky, to Lexington, Kentucky, with a Marine friend named Glass. And I went there and spent a couple of days, at least one night, with him before I went on back to New York City. And I enjoyed that trip over there to see the bluegrass country. And I know we went to a basketball game, which was really a great thing in Kentucky, and was able to see the places where they raised the horses and that sort of thing, and then move on to New Jersey, where the ship was being built. Now, I reported to the ship at the shipyards, and I was staying at the YMCA. I'd gotten a room there. I think it cost me about $1.50 a night to stay there at the YMCA in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I'd go no, it wasn't Jersey City, it was Newark, New Jersey, and which was not too far from the shipyards. And each day I would go to the shipyard and I would kind of visit on the ship and learn about the different parts of the ship and where my equipment would be and that sort of thing. While I was there, I got a very slight case of the mumps, so I went over to Brooklyn and reported into the sick bay and stayed there a couple of days until the swelling went down and they released me, and I went back to the New Jersey where the ship was being finished up. I wasn't there but a couple of weeks, and they finished building the ship, and we all moved on the ship over to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, where they tied us up, and they were to complete the final assembly of equipment and everything on the ship, and we would have the commissioning. Well, the ship was commissioned, the USS Ingraham, DD 694, on March the 10th of 1944. That was when it was officially turned over to the Navy and became a warship of the United States Navy during World War II. Fortunately, Mama and Daddy and Marcel and Marcy were able to come up for the commissioning ceremony. So I had got them passes or tickets so they could come on the base at the Brooklyn Navy Yard and attend the ceremony. So they were able to do that. I didn't get to stay with them very long because there was so much to do with after the commissioning to get everything ready, and all the people were assigned to the ship. Now our captain was a Captain Gordon, who had been a submarine captain. Actually, he was a commander in rank, but he was the captain of our ship. And he was a very nice fella. Being a submarine commander, he was the kind of officer that was close to the men and good to the people, and so he didn't give us any real trouble and was a very good captain, I thought. So now we were in Brooklyn Navy Yard, and there were two people that were assigned to the ship as radio men, and their names were Ray Wolf and Herbert K. Anderson, and I became real close friends with those two particular fellows, and we palled around together and went on liberty together, and we'd go into New York City from Brooklyn, and we'd go to Times Square and we'd go to Central Park, and we just visited all the different places in New York City and had a real good time there, going to Times Square, where we would a lot of times go to the big movie houses where they'd have stage shows and big bands and the latest movies and that sort of thing. So it was a real good experience for me to see New York City during the wartime. I remember one time when we were there, I got ready to go on liberty, and I was going by myself that particular time, and I had all my clothes laid out on my bunk, which was down just below the mess hall in the bow of the ship, and I was in the middle bunk. There were three bunks. Actually, they were hinged frames, like with canvas laced around these frames, or in the middle of the frames, and then we put our mattress on that and made it up with our sheets and our blankets and things. And underneath the bottom bunk were our lockers. There were three lockers there with lift-up lids, and you couldn't get into your locker unless you lifted up the bottom bunk. But I was lucky to get the middle bunk, which was one of the better ones. And so I had gone to take a shower, and I came back and I got up my dress clothes on and had to take the subway to get into Times Square, and I decided to go and eat a steak. And I went to this real nice cafe there near Times Square, and I got a steak dinner, and I ate that, and I remember it cost $1.80, which was quite a bit at that time. But I was splurging and eating good, so I got through with my dinner, and I went up to the cashier to pay for my meal, and I opened up my wallet, and all my money was gone. So I was really embarrassed, and I had to explain to the lady at the cash register that I had no money and that I couldn't pay for my meal. So she called the manager over, and I explained to him that someone had stolen my money without me knowing it, and I came in and I ate, and I didn't have money to pay for my meal. And he kind of shook his head and decided that really there wasn't much he could do about it. So he told me okay, and I said, well, I would come back and pay later. So he said, well, I guess they'd lost that money, so there wasn't much they could do. So they let me go, and I went, and then I decided, well, I better go on back to the ship because I only had about 30 cents in my pocket. So I knew I needed that to get back to the ship. So I used that to take the subway and get back to Brooklyn, and the subway cost 10 cents. So I was able to get back okay. And when I got back, I borrowed, I think, about $20 from one of my friends, and I didn't get Liberty the next night, but we got 2 out of 3 nights we would get Liberty, and the one night we would have to stay on the ship, so that they rotated us around for Liberty. Well, the first night I got Liberty, I went back in, and I went back to that restaurant, and I went back to the girl, and I told her I'd come back to pay the $1.80. Well, she called the manager back over, and I told him, I explained to him, I reminded him that I had come back to pay for my meal. And he was so surprised that I had come back to pay that he wouldn't let me pay then. He said that he had a brother or a uncle or something in the Navy overseas, and that he was going to just make that a free meal for me, and he would not let me pay that $1.80 then after I'd come back to pay it. So that was one experience I had in New York that I thought might be a little interesting. Some of the other things that we did, we'd go to Central Park, which was the main park on Manhattan Island, and we would go there, and usually we would meet some girls, and we would talk to them, and we would maybe go to a movie or something, or go to eat some supper. And I remember one time we met some Italian girls, and they took us up to their place where they lived to meet their family, and we went in what they call a flat, which is really an apartment, and they must have had 15 Italian people in that family, and they were all jabbering, and we ate spaghetti with them, and they were all having a big time, and we enjoyed that visit, seeing a different kind of people that we were used to, and a different lifestyle, and that was kind of enjoyable. Well, while we were there in Brooklyn, they decided that our shakedown cruise would be to Bermuda. So, and this was about in April of 1944. In fact, on about the 15th of April, we left New York, and we arrived at Bermuda in the Atlantic Ocean on the 17th of April of 1944. Well, this was really my first trip out into the real ocean, and I enjoyed it. We had good weather, and we went to Bermuda, and we went to a town, one of the main towns called Hamilton, Bermuda, and we stayed there in Bermuda about a month. And while we were there, we would go out during the day, and we would practice maneuvering the ship, and we would practice gunnery. And it was really, the idea was to get everybody familiar with all the equipment and their jobs and what they were supposed to do, and really make us into a fighting ship. So we spent about 30 days there working out of Bermuda, and we were able to go into Hamilton and on Liberty while we were there, and we enjoyed seeing that quaint little village, because they didn't allow any automobiles there that had motors over 10 horsepower. Most everybody rode bicycles, so we'd go into town and rent a bicycle and ride around and see the different sites. It had kind of a tropical climate, and there were beautiful flowers, and it was really just an old English type town, and we had a lot of fun visiting the different places in Bermuda, and we took pictures and all that, and it was a very beautiful place, and we enjoyed it. In fact, a lot of people go there on their vacation. But on the 16th of May in 1944, we left Bermuda and went back to New York. Well, when we got back to New York, they decided that they needed to make some changes to the ship. So we stayed there in New York for another month and a half while they made all these changes to the superstructure. And so we enjoyed visiting New York some more and seeing all the sights and the museums and all that sort of thing. So after they got through with taking care of the changes to the ship, they decided that we would go to Norfolk, and we went to Norfolk and did some training, more training there, and this was in July, and almost through August of 1940 we spent in that area. And then on August the 21st we took the battleship Missouri and the cruiser Alaska. We escorted them down to Trinidad in South America, and we went down there and we were able to go ashore at a little town down there, which was interesting to see how they lived down in Trinidad. And then we left Trinidad and went to the Panama Canal, where we passed through the Panama Canal, and that was real interesting to me because I had read about the Panama Canal and everything. And when we went to Panama City, they gave us liberty, but they were very careful to tell us about all the venereal disease at Panama City and to caution us and make sure that we didn't come up with some kind of venereal disease. So we went on through the Panama Canal and came out on the Pacific side, and we went on up the west coast, on up past South America, and we came into this was on the 30th of August. We left Panama City, and on September the 7th we arrived at San Pedro, California, and we only stayed there one day, and but we did get liberty, and we went into town. And the thing I remember about that place is I had gone ice skating, and when I came back it was late at night, probably 11 o'clock at night. I was taking a bus to get back to the docks where I would catch a water taxi and go out to the ship. Well, the fog came in and it got so bad that the bus driver could just barely see the center line, and he finally got us to the San Pedro boat dock, and I caught a water taxi, and we went out into the harbor, and we would go a little ways, and then we stop, and we would listen for the ships that used horns to give the signal the number of their ship, and then we would listen, and then he'd recognize a ship, and then he would go to it and take some of the people that were going to that particular ship. Well, it took till about 5 o'clock in the morning for us to find the ship I was on, and I finally got there and just crawled into bed when it was time to get up for muster. But anyway, we left San Pedro on the 8th of September of 1944, and we escorted the battleship West Virginia to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And while we were there, we stayed there in Hawaii for a while, and we did what they call an advanced shakedown, and we would go out and do more target practice and learn more about handling our ship and everything. And while we were there, we were able to go on liberty at Pearl Harbor and go into Honolulu and visit that city. And I went to the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, which had been taken over by the Navy, and they had submarine crews that stayed there when they were back in port. But I was able to go there and watch the hula dancers, and I rented a surfboard and went out and tried surfing, and seemed like I swallowed about half the Pacific. I'd get going and I'd stand up on the board, and pretty soon the nose would dig under the water, and the wave would flip me over, and the board would go one way and I'd go the other, and I'd go under and trying to get back up and gasping for breath and everything, and I'd swallowed about half the Pacific Ocean, I think. But that was fun, and it was fun visiting Honolulu and seeing Pearl Harbor and all of that. I remember we could Dole Pineapple, which has a big factory there, we could get pineapple juice for a nickel a can, and it was very good. And we would go there at Pearl Harbor on the land and kind of have our liberty there sometimes. But after about a month at Pearl Harbor on the 24th of October 1944, we started south to get into the war, and we escorted the Yorktown down to a little island called Anahuac. And we got off the island, there was nothing there but just sand with water, all Pacific Ocean all around it. But we went over there and had just to get off the ship and walked around the island and took a little swim, but we only stayed there a day. And then we escorted the carrier Yorktown on down to the group of islands called the Ulithi Islands. That was must have been 1,000 little islands there, but in the middle of it, it had a real nice deep area that the ships could congregate, and it was protected from the bad weather and the storms, and it was used a lot by the Navy to gather up their ships and then to head out on their various missions from there. So that was, we arrived at Ulithi on the 3rd of November 1944. While we were at Ulithi Islands, we were able to go, they would let us off the ship and take us over to this island called Mogmog. And there were no people on there, it was just palm trees and a beautiful beach and beautiful blue, clear ocean water around it, just like the South Pacific type of islands. And we'd go over there and they'd send cases of beer, because we were not allowed to have any kind of beer or alcoholic beverages on the ship, and they'd take some cases of beer over onto the island and everybody'd have a beer or two. And I like to go swimming in that clear water and on the coral reef and everything, and so we'd enjoy getting off the ship and onto some dry land occasionally, and then they'd carry us back onto the ship and take another group over and do the same thing. So we enjoyed that very much. And then on the 5th of November of 1944, we left Ulithi and we started escorting carriers off of the Philippine island of Luzon. And that went on till the 18th of November. And then we were sent from there down to the South Leyte Island in the Philippines, and we patrolled the Surigao Strait at Leyte, which it was a real hot spot very recently when they had the big naval battle between the Japanese ships and the American battleships and carriers and everything, and it was really a big, probably the greatest naval surface ship battle that there ever was. And we went in there and patrolled that strait looking for ships, looking for enemy ships, looking for enemy airplanes. And I think that is when we shot down our first Japanese airplane that flew over, and it was at nighttime, and we used our radar equipment to shoot that particular Japanese plane down. And we stayed there until the 2nd of December 1944, and we had the job of escorting some cruisers and battleships down to the island of Palau. And we did that, and then we came back and we escorted landing craft to Mindoro, where they were going to land on Mindoro and start taking the Philippine islands back. and that was around on the other side of the Philippines toward Manila, and we went in a convoy. And during that time, I know an Australian destroyer was disabled some way, and we had to stay back and help them. And then we went on to catch up with the main invasion force, and we had kamikaze planes try to get to the carriers, and I watched one of them fly right into the side of the battleship California, and it was just amazing to me that that plane was able to do that with the firepower and the bullets and the shells that were being shot at that particular plane. But it just kept going and flew right into the side of that battleship. Of course, it did a lot of damage, but it didn't do anything to really incapacitate that big battleship. So it kept on with the invasion force, and we were felt relatively safe because as long as there were carriers and battleships along, the kamikaze suicide planes would not attempt to bother us. We were too small potatoes for them to mess with. So on the 15th and 16th of December in 1944, we participated in the invasion of Mindoro, and we went up and we bombarded the land, and we were with the battleships, and we were right there where they were all had their guns shooting onto the land, and they would use spotter radio men on the land to direct the fire of the surface ships that were only about 2 or 3 miles off the beaches. And then on the 16th and the 17th, we escorted the landing craft that had been used in the invasion of Mindoro back to Leyte. And we got back over there, and then it was getting close to Christmas time, but we were sent to Ulithi to get provisions, and then we went to Palau on some kind of mission. I don't know what it was, but that was our Christmas was down there, and we had a Christmas dinner aboard ship. It was really not a big Christmas celebration, but we were able to have a Christmas dinner. Then on the 2nd of January of 1945, we escorted battleships and small carriers back to Lingayen Gulf, and we were there when a suicide plane hit a small carrier, and it was sunk by the suicide plane because of the fires and explosions that occurred after the suicide plane had hit into the carrier. And on the 6th of January, there were 4 bombs dropped near us, and we shot down another plane, and there were 4 destroyers in our squadron that were damaged by bombs and things like that. Now, the bombs would land, usually we'd see them land off in the water somewhere, but we were fortunate that we didn't get any of them that hit us. And then on the 7th and 8th, we bombarded the beach up near Manila and at Lingayen Gulf, and then the troops were landed, and there were also 2 bombs dropped near us during that invasion at Lingayen, which was up toward Manila. They were trying to get to the Manila area and take the city of Manila back. So then on the 10th to the 17th of January, we patrolled in that part of Lingayen Gulf and escorted battleships and tankers and different landing craft and things back to Leyte on the 28th of January, and then on back to Ulithi. So on the 10th of February of 1945, we joined Task Force 58, and we started escorting carriers up into the Tokyo area. And this is when they had the first big carrier air raids on Japan. and we went up within 50 miles of Japan, and we were up there escorting the carriers so that trying to keep the submarines from getting close enough to them to do any damage to them with torpedoes. So that was our big job. And while we were up there, one evening, it was on the 16th of February, we had another destroyer ram into us from the side. It was the USS Barton, which was the DD-722. Ran smack into the side of us, and it climbed up on, fortunately it climbed up on top of us, and it tore one of the 40 millimeter guns loose, and it had caused a lot of damage to the upper part of the ship, but nothing to the hull, so that we weren't in any danger of sinking from that collision. But it got everybody upset, and it was at nighttime, and it was pretty cold then, and we all got our life jackets on, not knowing what was going to happen. But it would have been really a very bad thing to have to get in that cold water at night like that, if the ship had cut into us, and we would have sunk. But anyway, the admiral, he got all upset, and he sent both of us back to Saipan, where to get repaired. And while we were going back, we encountered some small Japanese ships, and we sank 2 small cargo ships. And on the 16th and on the 17th, we sank another small cargo ship, which was really kind of a one-sided battle. And survivors got in their boats and everything, and they were so close to Japan, we didn't bother with picking them up or anything. And we went on to Saipan and got our damage fixed up. And while we were there, we were able to go over and kind of visit the island, and we went up and saw the caves where they had battled when the Japanese had gone back in the caves, and they had to root them all out. But there were no Japanese there then, of course. Then on the 23rd of February, we left Saipan and we went to Iwo Jima. And we stayed there in Iwo Jima a couple of days, and we would stand off of the island where the mountain was, and we would bombard the different places, the caves or whatever, the Japanese positions. And we had a Marine over on the island who directed our fire, and all night long we sat there in the water, and we, with our 5-inch guns, we would bombard the different targets wherever that fellow would tell us to shoot. And then on the 27th of February, we left Iwo Jima and we went off Okinawa, and we got over there around the 1st of March, and we stayed over there with carriers until around the 4th, and we went back to Ulithi then. And we stayed in Ulithi until the 21st of March, and went back to Okinawa, and then we went to the island itself and went into the port at after we had escorted carriers around the island so that their planes could protect our own ships and our troops and everything. We went into the port at Karemareta on the 22nd of April, and then we went back out on picket duty, which was really radar station duty off Okinawa, so that our radar could pick up enemy aircraft coming in to bomb the ships or whatever, or use their suicide planes. And at first we were on picket duty on the southern part of Okinawa, which was the farthest away from Japan, and it was not near such a dangerous job. And then on the 30th of April, we were sent to picket duty up on the north end of the island, which was the dangerous part, because all the air raids that came down from Japan to Okinawa came over that area. And we stayed there. We were there with the destroyer Morrison, and on one morning, I remember, it was a clear day, and we were about 5 miles off of the north end of Okinawa, and we were with the Morrison. We were right following along behind the Morrison, the destroyer Morrison, and when we were there on picket duty, we always had 2 patrol planes from a Navy carrier or from the Marines that were stationed on the island that would fly over us on patrol duty, and that was to give us help in case there was an air raid. And they stood 4-hour watches over us, and were just being relieved by 2 other planes, and they came down over the water, just over the water, and they came alongside our ship, and it was kind of a farewell salute on their part, and they flew toward the Morrison, and the people were on gunnery station at the time because of the uneasiness and the attacks that they had gone through and everything. They were startled by the approach of one of our Marine airplanes, and they opened fire on it, and it immediately hit the plane, and it surprised me. I heard the fire open up, and I jumped outside and saw the other plane just take off in a vertical movement. And the second plane and the first one had been shot down, and the pilot killed, and we picked the pilot up by catching his parachute and pulling him aboard, and of course he was dead from the gunfire and the explosion on his airplane. So we shot down one of our own planes, and there were a lot of apologies and everything, but it was too late after that. But it was because of the uncertainty around and everybody being jittered from the Japanese planes, especially the suicide planes, which were very effective and were able to damage an awful lot of our ships during that time. Well, on the 4th of May of 1945, there were 180 Japanese planes came over us, headed for Okinawa and they were mostly suicide planes, and about 60 or 70 came at our particular little group, which consisted of 2 destroyers and a number of small surface craft that were put up there to pick up survivors of the destroyers, because there were so many of them that were being damaged and sunk. Well, I was, when this all took place, was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and fortunately at that time we had 4 patrol airplanes over us, because 2 of them had just relieved the other 2, so the 2 that had been on duty stayed, and they were able to help us in the attack that followed on our ships. Well, I was standing out on the torpedo deck when it all started, and I watched then the Morrison was about 500 yards to the north of us, and I stood up in the open on the torpedo deck watching the Japanese planes coming down, trying to drop their bombs and trying to fly into the Morrison, which was the first one they got to, and several of them missed, and then they were able to hit the Morrison, and I watched one of them drop his bomb alongside of the Morrison, and then he kind of peeled off and headed for us. Well, right behind him was one of our Navy Hellcats trying to shoot him down, and I was standing out there watching, and they were headed right for me, both of them, and it occurred to me that bullets were going to start flying all over our ship, and it wasn't a very healthy place to be out there in the open with all that happening. So I kind of ran to the starboard side of the ship and down a ladder and got underneath an overhang, and by that time they had hit the Japanese plane, and he had exploded, and parts were flying everywhere, and fortunately I was underneath the overhang, and I could hear the parts falling on the ship. In fact, the propeller fell on the fantail, and they found it later there, and so I decided that it was better for me to be inside, protected. So I went in through one of the hatch doors and on up to the radio shack, where I sat in there while the battle was going on, and there were 7 planes that tried to get to us to sink us, and we shot down 6 of them, and the 7th one we hit, and he was headed for the ocean, And just before he hit the water, well, he leveled off and he skimmed along the water, and he plowed right into the port side forward of our ship. And he came in just above the water line, and he knocked a big hole, almost a perfect imprint of the airplane through the side of the ship, in through the mess hall, and his 500-pound bomb exploded on the far side of the ship and blew a hole in that side of our ship. And when that happened, the smoke, black smoke, immediately came into the radio room, and within a second or two, we were unable to see it all. But we immediately jumped up, and I put my hand on the shoulder of the fellow ahead of me, and we headed for the door to get out of there. And then they went to the left, and there was fire in that direction, so they were turned the other way, and then we went on out up a passageway a little ways, and then out onto an upper deck into the open. Well, this was on the side where the plane had hit, and we kind of looked over the side, and there was this big hole in the side of the ship, and they were lowering a fire hose over the side, and a fellow came out the big hole and grabbed onto the fire hose, and they pulled him up, and he was the only survivor from that area down there, where there were 15 men killed and 30 were wounded and pretty badly burned. So I didn't have my life jacket on, so I started looking for a life jacket, and I got a life jacket and put it on, and I went to the back toward the amidships and went down to the main deck, and there was a fellow in a cage-like stretcher, and his leg was half blown off, and I'll never forget that he kept rolling out of that basket, and they'd put him back, and then he'd roll out of it. And then it appeared as if we were going to go ahead and sink because of the big hole in our side, and the water was pouring in and everything, and the bow of the ship had gone down under the water, and the fantail was sticking up out of the water. Well, they gave the order then to jettison ship, which means to get everything off that's loose that would lighten the ship and keep it from going ahead and sinking. Well, they fired all 10 torpedoes off the side to get that weight off, and then they started dumping the depth charges off, and we sort of formed a team, and anything loose that we would throw it over the side. So we just threw everything, chairs and anything that was not tied down, we would, or a part of the ship, we'd throw over the side. Well, it was nip and tuck, and all of our guns were knocked out but one. And fortunately, the things were beginning to quieten slightly, and more of our airplanes had arrived at the area and were shooting down the Japanese planes, because we were just a sitting duck there, really. If there'd have been any more Japanese planes there, they could have got us real easy. It seemed to me it was a real quiet ocean. The weather was perfect. The sun was out. I could see the land over a few miles. I was at that time anxious to get off the ship and swim over to the land, but I wasn't really thinking much. But I was just waiting for them to tell us to abandon ship, and then I would have been off of that ship, because it was such a good target for anything that wanted to go ahead and sink it. But it was able to just barely teeter in between sinking and not sinking, and fortunately it did not sink. And so they got the a hospital boat came to where we were, and they took the wounded off. And then after a while there, they sent a tugboat out, and they hitched on to the fantail of our ship and started towing us back to the port on the southern end of Okinawa. And we spent just about all of that evening and that night getting towed back. I think it was about 60 miles back to that port where they had just hundreds of damaged ships in there. There was a lot of these little craft around that were used to pick up survivors of the Marson, which was sunk, and we also lost one of the small craft that was sunk by one of the Japanese bombs. There was a PBY airplane down in the water, and they were sitting on the wing watching it, but they used their 50 millimeter guns to help keep the some of the Japanese planes from further damaging them. And we had tried to get them to come on our ship, but they said no, that it was too dangerous to be on our ship, that they would stay on their airplane. So anyway, we got into the port called Karamoretta in Okinawa, and we tied up alongside some other ships, and they put a wooden patch on over the hole on the side of our ship and tried to pump out the water, and that wouldn't work, because then they found the big hole in the other side of the ship where the bomb had gone off, and they had to patch it, and then they were able to pump the water out and get the dead men out from down there where they had been for a couple of weeks, and then put us in dry dock where they could put a steel patch on us. We stayed in the Karamoretta for about a month, and it was a very hairy experience for me, because this was really the first time during the war that I had been afraid, and at that time I realized that it was really serious business, and people got killed and hurt, and that I could have been one of them. And so before that, I was just, I guess, too young to really think that I was going to have any problems with the war. So that month was a scary time for me, and all of my area where I had my bunk and everything was destroyed by the bomb, and all of my possessions were destroyed, all of my clothes and everything, and all I had was borrowed dungarees and borrowed shoes and things like that, and I slept back in somebody else's bunk in the fantail, and so I was completely out of any kind of possessions. And during that time, our mess hall was completely knocked out, so we had to eat sandwiches and peaches and canned things and whatever they could round up for us, and then later on we were able to eat on one of the other ships to get some better meals. But I remember they stuck trays in chlorine water, and I hated to eat. They never dried them or anything. You just pull them out of those big old garbage cans of chlorine water, and then they'd put the food on them, and you got about half chlorine and half food, and it really made it taste bad, and it was kind of sickening, and I never will forget that. But that was a bad experience, but they got us patched up, and we were able to move out of the harbor, and we escorted some other ships on back to Hawaii. While we were there, we would get warnings about Japanese swimming out to the ships and climbing aboard, and they actually did that on the cruiser Indianapolis, and they'd come aboard, and then they would kill with knives whoever they could before they were eventually overcome by our people. And that was very scary, and you didn't want to walk around on the decks at night. And the guards were especially alert for that type of thing, and it was just really the war brought home to me, and I didn't much like that part of it. So I know when we were in dry dock, I was standing up on the one of the decks, and I saw a small plane coming toward us, and it really did scare me, because I didn't know that it was one of our own, and I thought it might be another suicide plane coming in to get us, and I ran for cover. I know I remember thinking that maybe it was going to be another bad experience, but it turned out okay. And we came back to Hawaii, and then we went to San Francisco, where we went into one of the shipyards for repair. And after the first month, I was able to get leave and go back to San Antonio for a month. The thing I remember about coming back, we'd been 14 months on the ship, away from land and away from any port or liberty or anything like that, and going into San Francisco, the first time I went into town, I got on a trolley or a bus, and there were women on the bus, and it seemed very strange to me being in the presence of women again after 14 months. It just was kind of an eerie, strange feeling, I remember. But came home to San Antonio in August of 1945, and I was home whenever the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and then the one on Nagasaki, and then that ended the war. So I was home when the war ended, but I had to go back to San Francisco, report back to the ship, which they had pretty well repaired in a couple of months. And after that they sent us down to San Diego, and we spent time down at San Diego escorting carriers that were training pilots to land and take off from the carrier Randolph. And while I was down there, Buddy was at North Island as a cook, and I was able to see him down there, and in fact he spent the day with us one day out on the ship, and when we had gone out to escort the carrier. And the reason they needed us is that we followed along behind the carrier in case one of the pilots missed the carrier and hit the water. We'd pick him up. That was our job. It was kind of a special duty that we had as a pickup ship in case of an accident. But then we stayed there for a while, and then in March of 1946 they sent me to Camp Wallace near Galveston for discharge. And on the 13th of March of 1946 I was discharged from the Navy after spending 3 years and 7 days in the Navy. When I went to boot camp at San Diego, I went in, of course, as an apprentice seaman, and then when we got out of boot camp, we were made seaman second class. And then when I went to that 1-month school in Indiana, when I got through with that, they made me a seaman first class. And then after the 3-month school in Washington, D.C., I was made radio maintenance man third class. And then when I got through with the next 6-month school, I was promoted to radio technician second class, and that was the rank that I held when I went on the ship. I think my pay was about $100 a month. And then after close to the end of my time on the ship, I was made radio technician first class, and that's the rank that I held when I finished my time in the Navy. Now, I was not in the regular U.S. Navy. I was in the U.S. Naval Reserve, which they had during the war, which meant that you served for whatever time it took to win the war, which turned out to be 3 years for me. And I was like 20 years old when I got out of the Navy in near Galveston. Now they separated me and gave me bus fare to go home to San Antonio after I was discharged, but I decided, well, I'll just hitchhike home. So I got out on the highway and caught an immediate ride and rode all the way, and the people, whoever picked me up, let me out about 3 blocks from my house on New Braunfels Street, and I was able to walk on home. So after that I was completely out of the Navy and was able to get back into civilian clothes. When we got our leave after we came back from overseas, we came back into San Francisco and passed under the Golden Gate Bridge and everything, went into Huntington shipyards there at San Francisco. We decided, that is Ray Wolf and Herb Anderson and I decided we would try to get the military plane back to go back home rather than riding a train or a bus or something like that. So we found out that we had to go to Sacramento, California, to the air base there, And so we caught a bus over there, and we got over there, and we turned in our papers. And you had to be overseas at least a year before you could get a military ride. So we went in there, we got in there late in the evening and stayed there in that waiting room just about all night. And about 8 o'clock the next morning, well, they called my name, and I went out and I got on a DC-3 airplane to go back home. And so we flew down to Los Angeles, and I remember that while we were there, they had a jet airplane, which is the first jet airplane that I had ever seen. It was still kind of a secret, but it was in a hangar there. And so I started to get off the plane there at Los Angeles, and the fellow asked me where I was going. I told him San Antonio. He said, well, that plane was going to San Antonio. So I put everything back on the airplane, and we went on to El Paso, and then flew into Kelly Air Force Base here in San Antonio. And that was my first flight in an airplane. And I remember one thing that bothered me was the movement of the wings. It seemed like they flapped an awful lot, and I was afraid they were going to break off. But I found out later that's the way they were supposed to do. So it was a safe trip, and I was able to get back to San Antonio in pretty good time without a whole lot of hassle with trains and buses. So that was the experience I had on my last leave that I got from the Navy. And while we were home during that time in August of 45, we went to the beach and had a good time down there. And that was when the coal still owned the resort cabins down there. We got a nice big cabin and had a real good time. And then after I think I was on the train headed back to San Francisco when the word came that a big hurricane had hit, and it wiped out the whole beach area. All of those cabins and buildings there, and about the only thing left was the main coal house that they lived in, and the rest of it was just leveled and washed out. And after that, it was never rebuilt as a resort anymore. Then it became people buying individual lots and building their own houses, which we did, of course, in 1946. And one thing I would like to say at the end of this tape is that I was very proud to be a part of the Navy during World War II, and although I was not able to do a great deal to contribute to the war effort, my little part maybe helped, and I was proud to be a part of that, and proud to be a Navy serviceman. And it was quite an experience, and along with millions of other Americans, I suppose that we were able to do, each of us, our little bit to keep this country free, and our flag still waving, and have the liberties and freedoms that we have today. And I guess the real sad part is all the many men that had to give their lives, and the ones that were very badly hurt, as we lost 15 of our fellow sailors on the ship I was on, and 30 of them badly wounded. It's a very high price to pay, but one that was worthwhile, as we know today. But to be a part of that great effort in that great war is a real privilege for me, and I'm very proud to have been a part of it. After listening to this tape, of course, it's been 47 years since this all took place, and there's some few things that I forgot to talk about, and I'd like to go back and maybe fill in a few places on some things that I left out. So, if you don't mind, let's go back to when we left New York to go down to Norfolk. One thing that happened that I remember is that we were going into the docks at Norfolk, and it was a big cement like dock, and it had big old 12 by 12 timbers tied to posts alongside of the cement, and we were headed in at about a 45-degree angle, and somehow the signals got mixed up, and we didn't turn to come in kind of sideways to the dock, and we just kept going at that 45-degree angle, and I was standing out on the deck, and I watched, and we never did turn, and there were some people sitting there on the dock, and they jumped up and ran, and we just plowed right into the side of that dock, and our bow ripped through the big 12 by 12 timbers and just started and hit the concrete, and it just kind of slid along the concrete, and it just peeled that 12 by 12 timber back just like it was a cedar shaving or something, and it was really surprised everybody, and it kind of bent up our bow a little bit and caused everybody to get all excited about our mistake. But I think it was a pilot that was bringing us in that screwed up and didn't get things taken care of properly. But anyway, that was something that I thought was kind of a unusual experience to take place with a big ship like ours. And then going all the way back over to when we were at Okinawa, and we the Japanese plane hit our ship. One of the things that I had forgot was that when the plane went on through the mess hall and over to the far side, the 500-pound bomb exploded about 10 feet from my bunk. Well, as it happened, the fellow that slept right below me was in his bunk at the time, and so of course it blew him to pieces. And I was, of course, extremely fortunate that I wasn't down there at that time, because I didn't have a battle station, but I had spent the night up in the radio room, and I slept behind the transmitters in a little space back there. I put some life jackets and I slept down there, so I wasn't even down there the night before, but maybe the good Lord was looking after me and kept me up there where I wouldn't be tempted to stay down there in my bunk and sleep late that morning like he did, and in that case I would not be able to make this narration, of course. And then another thing, that if that plane would have come in about I would say about 20 feet higher, or 15 or 20 feet higher, he would have plowed right through the pilot house and on into the radio room where we were, and then it would have been Katie bar the door for me and all of the friends that I had. So there was another instance of something, destiny or whatever, taking care of me. So I feel very lucky, or very fortunate to have been able to come through that without any injury or any loss of limb or anything of that sort. So I was as fortunate as was everyone in our family, especially with Robbie, whose ship was sunk out from under him, and he came through it without any real damage to himself. Another thing, that when we were back in that port at the southern part of Okinawa, after we had been damaged, we in the evening, every evening, they would smoke up the entire harbor, just be covered with black smoky-like material, which you could breathe okay, but it would just cover up all of the ships, and you couldn't hardly see anything. But that way the planes couldn't find us in the harbor to either bomb us or dive into us with their kamikaze planes. And I would sometimes, it was kind of eerie though, with all that covered up, and you knew the Japanese planes were flying over, and you didn't know where they were, and they didn't know where you were. And I would sometimes lie in my bunk, which was actually someone else's, and I would be maybe 18 inches from the deck above me, and where they had gun mounts, and I could hear the guns turning and tracking the Japanese planes as they flew over. Even though they didn't open fire or anything, they followed them in case there was any reason to start firing. They were able to, but it was a very scary feeling, and I know I sweated through a lot of those air raids, listening to those gun turrets move around, waiting for something to happen. And another thing is they had some cases of Japanese swimming into the harbor and pushing depth mines up to the ship, and when they would contact the side of the ship, they would go off, and of course they would kill the swimmer, but they would also blow a big hole in the ship. And when trying to go to sleep or something, and it'd be below decks and you'd hear something bump the side of the ship, it would always make you think maybe that's one of those mines that somebody had pushed out there and banged it up against the side of the ship, and you expected an immediate explosion and then oblivion. So it was kind of a scary period for me, and I really, for the first time during the war, wondered whether I was going to get through it unscathed or not. And I was very thankful, of course, whenever we got back to the States, and I realized that I would at least get back home one more time, and then when the war ended, well, I was very happy that I wouldn't have to go back into combat again and take that chance of not being able to live a full life. So that's kind of maybe give you an idea of what my feelings were during that time, and what it was like to be a member of that ship's crew, and like many others that had even much worse situations to go through. Also, Nan had asked me if I'd mentioned having one leg over the rail whenever we were about to sink. I was pretty anxious to get away from that ship, and there were actually 4 or 5 people in the water immediately after the plane had hit our ship, and it was such a nice day and smooth water, and I knew I could swim over to that land, even though it was 2 or 3 miles away, that I was really anxious to get off of that ship. And I thought for sure they were going to tell us to abandon ship, but of course they didn't, and so when things calmed down a little bit, well, I was able to participate in the jettisoning the ship and getting rid of all the stuff. And some of the depth charges they threw over the side, they forgot to take the detonators out, and they were exploding under the ship, and they had to stop that, of course, and that was kind of a close call, but they did get that taken care of and got all the depth charges off, and we were able to lighten the ship enough to where it didn't sink. When they pumped the water out of the ship after they put the patches on, we were able to go down there, and some of the men you could see that had drowned were still, they had been unable to get them out of there before. They were still lying down in there, and that was about 2 weeks, so they were beginning to bloat some. And then after they got the bodies out, well, we had to go down in that area and clean up, and they had a barge that they brought alongside the ship, and we went down there and we picked all the stuff out, that all the material and everything that was loose to get out of the ship. And I remember that I was down there picking up small things, and I picked up part of a person's body, and I knew that because it was a kind of a soft, meaty feeling thing, and when I picked it up, it had a very bad smell to it. So, and it was soft, and so I passed it to another fellow and told him what it was part of a body, and of course it was unidentifiable, and so they passed it on up to do whatever they were going to do to it. I don't know. I imagine they just threw it on the barge with all the rest of the junk, but it was kind of a shocking experience for me, and it was right down there by my locker, so it could have been a part of the fellow that slept right below me. But there was nothing in my locker that I could salvage. I looked and tried to see if there might be a few things like my toothbrush or some of my personal things that I could get out of the locker, but it was so blown apart, and things were scattered around so much, and there was oil and water everywhere, and so I was unable to salvage anything at the time that belonged to me. The only thing I had was the things that I had on at the time, and then I borrowed a few extra clothes from some of my buddies, and was able to get by until we got back to where they could issue me new uniforms and things like that. Well, I guess in a way this probably is a little bit boring to listen through, but one of the reasons I wanted to do it was maybe for my grandchildren or my grandchildren's children might someday be interested in what it was like during a wartime. Hopefully there won't be any more wars, especially like that, and they'll be able to sit down and listen to their grandpa or their great-grandpa tell a little bit about the things that he experienced in the big World War in 1941 to 45. So I think I've pretty well covered everything, and I'm going to end it here, hoping that whoever might sit through this and listen to it will in some way maybe be a little bit wiser about how things that happened to his father or his grandfather or his great-grandfather or maybe even his great-great-grandfather in the big war which they call World War II.